All right, everybody. So today on the podcast, we're thinking roundtable. The third amigo might be joining later. We're not sure. It's probably like 5 or 6 a.m. over there, so maybe he'll wake up and pop in. But we do have Steve Hall with us today. How you doing, man?
I am very happy to be here. It's always fun chatting to you, Dave, and obviously like having Jacob here as well.
When he can make it.
He's normally good at bullying me, and I'm just like, I'm terrible at banter. I literally told a load of people the other day, I was like, I could never do banter. Like it's an English thing. I can't do it. I just take it. I'm just okay.
I was actually looking at like our last conversation. So the last date that I think all three of us actually talked was, it says on Skype here, it was last September, which to me, I was like, it's been over a year, which seems crazy to me because we've had, I think, 4 of the roundtables of all of us. But then I think it seems more recent because then I had you and Abel together, and then I had you individually, or no, I had you and Pascal, and then I had Jacob individually. So obviously, like, we're talking throughout this time, but I guess it's actually since we've all coordinated it. I actually didn't realize how much, again, because you and I talk on Instagram and stuff too, I didn't realize, I think this is like your 8th time or something on this podcast, but we're on I guess I've probably been talking to you in general since the summer of 18. It's weird, this whole podcast thing. I mean, I'm sure even for you, like how long you've been doing it, because to me, it still seems like my new venture. And to think that I've been doing it for more than 2 years, and I've had some people like you on, like, multiple times. I've had Lyle on like 4 or 5 times, and you realize like how much has actually gone on in that time span,
It's funny you say this because I literally just had Evan Godby, if you've heard that before, and I interviewed him like earlier this week, and I was like, the last time he came on was episode like 40 in 2018, and I was like, okay, it's been a long time.
Yeah. Who do you think has been your most frequent guest? Do you think it's like the 3DMJ guys? Or Mike Israel's got to be, yeah, and then
because we do the Q&A so frequently. After Mike, I'd actually be really interested to know who it is after Mike. I think Potter's slowly increasing just because I'm in quite close contact talking to Greg, and like you are as well. He's just such a guy, and he thinks about things again, and I'm really interested in people that think about things differently to how I do and how the rest of the kind of the crew do, and he definitely does. He has some interesting takes on things that I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah, I don't know who. It's definitely Mike, and then I don't know who it is after that actually.
Yeah, Greg, I just had him on for the 3rd time. I like Greg a lot. He's kind of like our age. He's got like a good experience in different areas. He just sent me his ebook. I told him, I said, like, my life is insane right now, but I'll at some point post about it in the next couple of weeks probably. But yeah, good guy to talk to. I was thinking, did you see the recent picture of Jared Feather? I just saw Charlie post about it, like from the back, his hamstrings and everything. Dude, what the hell is that person? Like, is that the same species as me? I mean, that's ridiculous. It's crazy, man. His waist is so small, and his legs, his glutes, everything are just like, I mean, it almost looks disproportionate. It's just almost like weird, but in a very aesthetic way.
Have you ever watched the anime Baki?
No, I haven't.
If you just Google Baki, he literally kind of looks like one of the characters, like this Chinese anime where these guys are all jacked and they're like, it's just all cartoon. And I'm just looking at these guys being like, they're the most aesthetic like creatures. They're like Dragon Ball Z, but on steroids. Like, and that's like Jared looks like a character from this show, literally, like almost like perfect in many ways. Which, I guess perfection's a bit far, maybe, but. Looks
but I mean
his arms were a weak point, right? And they look they're crazy now.
He said that when he's fully dieted, I think he said he has a 28-inch waist, which is like, mine is like just under 32 when I'm really lean. Like, I have a pretty blocky waist, and I think you and I have kind of similar sized waists, so it just changes your aesthetics, and your everything just looks so different.
And do you know Paul? I can't remember. Is it Paul Canoe? Is that his last?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
He's got a similarly like freaky tiny waist, and I'm just like.
I haven't seen him at the gym in a while, but he's like standing next to him with just like normal clothes on. You can tell he's muscular, but it's not like. I mean, he's big, but it's not like holy shit. But then he takes his shirt off, and it's like, dude, like, what are these proportions? I mean, even when he was really not like skinny, but when he had a lot less muscle, you could just see that potential was there structurally, you know?
Yeah, some people are just blessed with that. Like you see, you're dealt with certain cards and you have to play with them in a certain way. And I'm always like, I don't know, if I've got these thicker joints, surely that means my maximum muscular potential is higher. And
Right.
going to come at some point.
Yeah, right, exactly. We have Jacob 2.0 in here. So I think this is the second time. I feel bad, Abel. It's not that we don't want to talk to you normally. It's just you're basically like on the bench, and then we call you in when Jacob doesn't show up.
I don't know why with that weird Australian accent. Isn't it better to listen to me? Jesus.
But always great to talk to both of you guys. Obviously, I talk to you guys quite a bit. Abel, you and I talk pretty much every day. Steve and I were just going to dive into my most recent podcast with Dr. John Jaquish. So, Steve, I had kind of cut you off and said, look, like, let's wait until we start recording. That was definitely a controversial podcast. So before I kind of delve into it, what did you think? First impression of it, Steve?
So, yeah, when I saw the guest, I was like, oh, like, I haven't heard of this guy, which is quite funny because I imagine he's actually quite big. But like in the niche that we're in, you don't, like, I just don't see these people because they don't come into it. So I was like, oh, I want to hear him. And then when you kind of spoke and you started talking, I was like, it was interesting because you're like, I wanted to, like, you don't know anything about me, like, so
right.
Meeting each other for the first time, which isn't normally how podcasts tend to go. Like, you normally have interacted a bit with the person. I thought it was interesting hearing you guys interact and talk. I thought he spoke well. He came across, I think, pretty well, to be honest. I had to go and see what the product actually was because some of it sounded almost too good to be true. And I mean, having seen the product, I would kind of have that opinion that a lot of it would seem too good to be true. So yeah, I thought I enjoyed listening to the podcast. Like, it was an enjoyable listen, but I don't know if like I'm going to go away and sell it behind me. And
did you happen to see my response video?
No, haven't seen it. No.
Okay, so that one's gotten quite a bit of attention too. I would, if you have time, watch that one. It's like 10 minutes, and I give my like full thoughts on it all. Abel, before I do you want to mention anything? I know you talked about making something yourself, so.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it was cool of you to get him on, and when you showed me what the guy is about and what the product is, I was like, man, I would have a hard time talking to this guy on air because I would just have so few things in common with him. I mean, I disagree with the whole philosophy, not the whole philosophy. I mean, the whole idea that this band tension-based training is somehow superior to weight training, especially when he has a book with that title of weightlifting is useless, or what's the name?
You know, and waste of time.
As the saying goes, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I think you did a pretty good job of it, considering that you pretty much feel the same way as well. But for me, I had to pause every like 2 to 5 minutes because I just needed some breathing room because he was dodging a lot of your questions. He was kind of arrogant. I don't think he came across that well. And I was actually prompted to do a response video to your podcast later on once you got all the glory and the fame from your response video. So yeah, some brief thoughts.
So yeah, Steve, definitely I think you'll be interested to see my response video. But for the most part, my thoughts on it were, so I heard about this guy like a year and a half or 2 years ago. He called himself the Iron Man of the fitness industry. Obviously, you know, the title is to draw attention. You know, weightlifting is a waste of time. I would say very good chance that this guy has used enhancements of different types over the years. Clearly has built up his body using probably traditional weight training. So my thoughts were, and I said this in the podcast, you know, almost everybody, you know, it's very easy to argue with people online and you get into these conversations and that are ridiculous, but almost everybody, I think when you talk like face to face, you kind of have a more reasonable stance and you agree on a lot of things, you know, and I said that to him. I said, you know, so let's see how this goes. I have to say he's probably one of the few people where after talking, I didn't really feel that way. I thought he kind of acquiesced to things I was saying a few times, you know, like he said, well, you know, yeah, in theory, you could just use bands on like a barbell and things like that in the gym. But what I said in my response video is like ultimately like what do I actually think about his intentions? Because it's one thing to just be kind of naive or really believe in something. Like for instance, I don't think Lane Norton with his like metabolic damage thing, I don't think he was lying to people intentionally. I don't think it was, he just strongly believed in it, and maybe the evidence shows like, okay, maybe it's not a permanent thing or whatever. But I don't think he was like being dishonest at all. And when talking to this guy Jaquish, my takeaway is like you're an intelligent guy, and I think that there's a lot of limitations to this system that you're not addressing, that it's gimmicky, and that you're not going to get the best results, and you're certainly not going to get like 3 times the results like he claims. And so at the end of the day, like, did I have a good conversation with him? Yeah, I enjoyed the topic. We had some laughs back and forth, but I do think that he's kind of a con there, and I think and a lot of it, he knows that what he's saying is kind of BS, and that's my problem with it, and why I didn't feel too bad about making a response video, because I appreciate you taking the time, and like I said, I would totally be cordial. And he even said like, oh, we could do another one. Like, not that I'd be totally opposed to that, but I feel like it's really important for all of us as podcasters to maintain integrity and say what we believe, and whether it's good or bad. And so that's kind of how I went into it. I was like, you know what, let's have this conversation. I know you've got a big following, let's see, but ultimately it's not something I could recommend. And I actually got a lot of positive responses to it, even with the response video, in an X3 like Facebook group, where a lot of people were saying themselves like, yeah, I have the product, but he's still a scammer. This is good because it's convenient and it's better than nothing. And
I paid for it, more importantly.
Right. But a lot of them still have the same opinions that we do about him and the product. Basically, they say, look, kind of what I said, it's mechanical tension. You can progress with it for sure, but is this going to like optimally develop your body? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think I just want to say, because I think I was listening to it from just it was in the back of like in the behind whilst I was like doing other work. So it was in terms of, and I can see why you enjoyed talking to him, because I think he comes across relatively like charismatic, and he's quite confident and speaks relatively well. And and when I think about it critically, like I think Abel thought about it a bit more critically, and you have like 100%. That's someone who's dangerous when they are that well, like they're good at speaking, they're confident, and they have like a physique behind it.
Yeah,
they're the people that are almost the most dangerous, because people believe them and they're very believable. And if you don't understand like we do, like I don't, it just, in my mind blows when I'm just like, so all the bodybuilders and the Mr. Olympia doing it wrong. Like
exactly, everybody. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. He was very well spoken. He was, I would say, kind of beyond confident and kind of arrogant. And it's, something I said to Abel is there's a feel when you've talked with a lot of people and you've had a lot of interactions, and you can just tell like, oh, wow, like you're good at this. You're good at talking to people like this. And if I didn't have a huge background in this area, I'd probably believe you, because you're charismatic, and that's, like you said, it can be dangerous if you don't have that background. And like I said, I'm not just trying to talk a lot of crap on the guy. I mean, I appreciate him taking the time. I would talk to him again, just in general, but I think it's a little bit dangerous and one of the biggest points I made is like, who's his real target audience? He'll talk about how it's like, these advanced bodybuilders are getting the best results. And it's like, really the target audience is that casual lifter who's kind of looking for the next thing, who doesn't understand. And that's fine. Like, there are people who get a lot of results with it. Ironically, most of the before and after pictures are fat loss transformations, because they discuss diet too. So it's like, yeah, you had some resistance training and you improved your diet a lot. And hey, that's great then. That's awesome. But it's not this like superior magic system or anything like that.
He's carnivore.
Yeah, I think
he's what?
Carnivore guy as well, wasn't he?
I found that out. Yeah, like as I was like, oh, okay, well that just makes it so much better, right? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think the fact that he mentioned that Dave Asprey is someone who he kind of spoke of him as someone who, sure, he's not perfect, but fundamentally he's doing the right thing. I think that speaks volumes of what his philosophy is, which is probably that, okay, maybe this is not as great of a system as I make it out to be, but it's still great. And yeah, I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case, because you're selling a product, which I just found out through your response video was $500.
Yeah.
I mean, holy crap. And the thing is, if I wanted to create an ebook which says weightlifting is useless, and I would make a point that, look, just get a freaking pull-up bar. I would be, I think, closer to the truth than this guy, because with a pull-up bar and with just stuff that you can pack into a backpack, your entire upper body is pretty much going to be covered. That's why people don't need to freak out during lockdowns if they cannot go to a gym. And if you do enough, high rep pistol squats and lunges and step ups on a couch or something, you're going to create a decent stimulus. Is it going to be as good as a great hack squat machine and leg pressing heavy weights? No, but you can make up for that. And that's kind of the same thing that he's saying with the band rows, that it kind of has the perfectly wrong resistance curve for that exercise, but you can make up for that. Okay, the fact that you can make up for it already suggests that it's inferior, right? So
I feel like we're getting a nice little preview of Abel's future response video here.
Yeah.
I think in a written transcript, I would have had a very different opinion to hearing it, which is actually what's scary, because I was just I wasn't taking it in. So no,
it's a good point. Yeah, seeing it in writing versus just because there's so much more than just the words, right? So actually, I want to get your opinion on one other thing here. So I think I have to space out controversial podcast a little bit, but somebody had talked to me about having Jason Blaha on, and it's funny because I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about this before we started recording, because the difference between you, Steve, and Jacob and myself is your podcast, it's pretty much everything you do is online coaching for the most part, right? And so I think your podcast, you have to take it as seriously as you can because it's kind of like your business. Jacob would be maybe a step below that in terms of how seriously he has to take the podcast, because he's also got the gym and other things that he's doing. I think largely the gym, but in-person training that he does as well. So it's not all about that. And then for me, as seriously as I do take the podcast, I'm a dentist, and this is something that I do as an enjoyable hobby, and I do coach people, actually now more than I used to because of the podcast. But it's not. I'm okay with not taking everything so seriously. You know what I mean? I have some more comical videos and everything, and so it's fine. And so somebody like John Jaquish, would I have had him on if I was you, Steve? Probably not, But for me, I think it's fine. And Abel, you're kind of in a similar situation where you're in fitness, but you also have another job unrelated to fitness. So with Jason Blaha, I was kind of okay, so would that be a good idea for the podcast? And I honestly think I would just want to talk to him, because I don't know if you ever watched his videos, Steve, when you were getting into it, or if you did, Abel, but I've been watching YouTube since it started, and Blaha was a big name from 2000 and 11 to 16 maybe, and he's still around but not as much. And obviously huge controversies in the industry. I mean, Lyle McDonald hates him, Lane Norton and him had that huge thing. But I've seen in the past I had seen so many of his videos, and I have plenty of criticisms about him, but I actually just think it might be an interesting conversation. So I'm going back and forth on it.
I would do it if I were you. I mean, the only thing is I would be not sure what to actually talk about with him, because it's not like he has a lot of controversial takes on a lot of things. So it's not like John Jaquish with, band tension is the end all be all. It's he gives pretty decent training advice and nutritional advice, I guess. It's just I haven't been watching his videos for in 2 years at least.
Yeah, it's been years for me too. I think the reason is, but that's actually almost part of it, is I actually think he's not just this idiot. I mean, the guy is deadlifting I think 600 pounds. He's got sound advice. He just was went through the biggest trolling of all time in YouTube fitness and stuff. So I think it could actually be a somewhat interesting conversation. Maybe a different take than what's out there. And I've had both Lane and Lyle on who hate each other as well. So I think. I certainly don't limit it in that sense.
I think your assessment of my podcast is at least spot on. I'm very careful with who I end up bringing on, even to the point where I actually can't even, unfortunately, remember his name. The guy from Squat University, where he has a big Instagram following. I can't actually remember his name. I'm terrible with names, but he puts out some not great information after doing the podcast. I realized that, and I'm I need to really be careful with whenever I bring someone on. I want to kind of fully research them, understand everything, and I've had characters on the podcast where I certainly don't agree with everything they say, and I think it's a balance, because I don't want to just bring on people and like spread my own dogma.
Exactly. Yeah. So you had the guy on from Squat University, and later you saw that he was putting out some questionable stuff.
Yeah. So, and I think there's partly because some of the content he spoke about in the podcast was like, I don't know, you've probably had it where you're speaking to someone, you're like, okay, and you're like,
yeah,
look, shit, I really just I think it's called Aaron Everett, maybe, or something.
Kind of sounds familiar.
But yeah, it was various points in there. I mean, mostly it was good stuff, and I think he mostly puts out good information. But
Mm-hmm.
there's sometimes people that they just have something that's just a bit like, that just doesn't seem like based. So it's challenging, actually, I think, as a podcast host in some ways, because you don't want to just. I sometimes find myself, I'm like, am I just bringing on people to confirm my own bias all the time? Which is.
Well, I think also you have different people on for different reasons, right? So if Holmes or Scott Stevenson on, it's like we're diving into the science, right? And that's what you're looking for. I've had some powerlifters on where I'm like, I'm not looking to you as an intellectual resource. You're super strong and accomplished, and that's awesome, and we're going to talk about that. But like, the information I'm getting from you and why I'm having you on, it's just different, and I think it's different reasons. And for me, I have a pretty broad spectrum, but with you, not that you don't, Steve, but you are, it's very educational, right? Like that's kind of the point of yours. And I think that's great. You really focus on that. So you may be more limited in who you can bring on. And also yours is specifically bodybuilding for the most part. I mean, you branch out a little bit. Whereas, for me, I mean, I've even considered at some point, just again, like the nice thing with the podcast is being able to talk to people who you maybe would not have had access to before, where I would be fine branching out to like something that's specifically just health or even, other things if they were interesting enough to talk to,
Yeah.
It becomes just wanted to say it becomes a really kind of fine line or a fine art once your podcast is very intimately tied with your business. Because, for example, Steve, you guys at Revive Stronger, it's pretty clear that you have a philosophy on training and dieting and structuring it in a certain way. And if you have someone on that is, has reasonable takes, but is in a completely different way, then either you have to be willing to be pretty disagreeable on your podcast, or it can actually become confusing to your own audience. It's like, okay, you're endorsing something like this, which is clearly not in line with what you're doing. Mike Matthews, for example, Muscle for Life, who, by the way, I respect more than most people. He's kind of a role model for me in many ways, mainly in like business stuff. But with him, I found this a little bit frustrating in that he got on people who disagreed with him on a couple of things. Like he was big on training a muscle group one time a week, for example, for a long time. And then he had someone on who was talking about training more frequently. And he would not disagree with them. He would just kind of find an in-between solution where he would just interrupt them all the time and not let them finish their sentences. So it's like he made it seem like they all agree on everything. It's like, well, you can train more times a week, but of course you need a very, very free schedule for that, and it's not feasible for most people. Anyway, next topic, protein intake, and it was like kind of frustrating to listen to.
I heard him talking with Ben Pekulski. I don't remember who was on whose podcast because they both had podcasts, but Ben Pekulski seems to believe that genetics just don't matter at all, and that he has shit genetics despite being, like a top 10 Olympia guy. He might have even been top 6 at one point. And Mike Matthews said, like, but not everybody can do that. And Ben was just saying, like, if they worked harder. And then I think Mike was just like, all right, I'm just going to drop it. I think, he was on Ben's podcast, and I think he probably, if you're a guest, like, you don't want to be a jerk and people are taking the time to talk to you, but yeah, it can be tough when you really disagree. I'm a pretty disagreeable person, so I don't mind doing it, but I understand why people do it.
It's amazing, Dave, that you still call people out when they skip the genetics topic, that you do that every time. I love that about you and your podcast. Like when you had Brian Whitaker on recently, and he started out on Doug Miller is as big as he is because he's so precise with his nutrient timing and whatever. And I was like, my brain started boiling, and then you called him out. Perfect.
I'm glad that somebody's appreciating it. By the way, Steve, are you sponsored by Resilient Nutrition? Is that their shirt there?
It is the shirt. I'm not sponsored by them though.
Oh man, so just doing it for free.
Yeah, happy enough to have a t-shirt.
Your body space is worth a lot, man. You have like 30,000 followers and subscribers. You got to get money for that. I told him I will share everything he wants as long as he sends me some resilient nuts. That's all I want.
Have you tried the product yet?
No, they don't ship to America yet.
Oh yeah,
I said like you can get it in like random countries over there, but you can't get it. You can't get it in France?
You can't, no. Just because someone messaged me and was like, I was trying to order it, but I can't get it in France.
Really? Interesting.
No, kind of random.
Oh. So
I want to be sponsored by Walden Farms.
What do you guys think about, actually taking that topic seriously as far as band training or just variable resistance? So chains, bands, you have guys who I respect, like John Meadows, who actually does incorporate reverse bands and banded training into their hypertrophy work. Obviously, that type of resistance has been used a lot by guys like Westside and powerlifters. It seems like even powerlifters have kind of gotten away from that, the chains and, Westside, like I said, it was like a huge thing. They would load up to incredible weights, and so that like at the top it's just maxed out, and then at the bottom you could be taking off 300, 400, 500 pounds at the bottom. Do you guys incorporate that at all? I know neither of you are like super focused on just strength training, but have you even tried it?
Steve, you can go ahead first.
Okay. So yeah, the banded stuff, I can only really talk in terms of hypertrophy because I just never look at strength or do any strength training. So I can't really comment on that. And I think I don't know, maybe it has more applications there in terms of for hypertrophy. It's interesting because it's actually in the last few years, at least to my eyes, has become something quite popular, at least, or it's maybe a trend that comes in and kind of goes away again, where people are banding up everything and doing
maybe even more now with COVID because you have to do home workouts and stuff. So.
Yeah. And because people are often using it to kind of level off the kind of match the strength profile to the resistance curve. If I've got that terminology right, I don't know. Because they're kind of reverse banding a hack squat because kind of the hardest position is the bottom, and then it gets really easy at the top. And I can see the kind of the idea behind it, and I understand that. Having tried it, I'm not sure it's kind of like a game changer or something magnificent. I more so utilize it now and then as variation if I want to, but it's another thing to have to think about, like in terms of setting it up and remembering the bands. And if, I don't know, you forget them one session, it's in your mesocycle. It's quite a big change from having bands but then not having anything. And I'm not aware of much research on it at all in terms of like actually trying to find evidence for it. So I think there was only one, and they kind of looked into it in mass, and it was like pretty equivocal to whether or not using it or not using it. So I don't tend to program for clients again because I don't expect them to have bands and carry them around. If they want to try it, I'm more than happy to kind of have it as a variation. I think it can be useful for potentially like, I don't know, if you've got a bit of a back injury or something, maybe kind of softening the lower position and making that a bit more comfortable could be okay. But I mean, there's probably other workarounds like that you can utilize, like using a leg press or something that's not going to axial load you the same way. Right. So my opinion is I can see the rationale. I need more kind of convincing evidence probably to utilize more because it's another inconvenience. And so mostly just use it as a variation.
Right.
Yeah, I myself had a short phase when I was just bending everything in sight. And I think just logically thinking about it for presses, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, on a bench press, the sticking point is somewhere here, as you're like coming off your chest, and then it gets easier again at the lockout position. So if you were to, for example, you do a set of 8, 1 rep in reserve, and then you just do a whole bunch of partials at the very top, you could do a bunch more reps. So if you're using the bands, you're equating the whole strength curve, and then it's kind of equally hard throughout the whole movement. So I think it makes a lot of sense. The reason why I stopped it is because it was just a pain in the ass, and people were looking at me weird in the gym all the time. And it was like, man, does it really worth it? I have kind of janky knees. They tend to act up quite a bit on certain movements, like on deep Smith machine squats. So for that, it was kind of handy that I could use a lighter load or actually a heavier load still. And then it was easier in the bottom if I'm reverse bending it, so the bend tension comes from the top. But the problem is that it's just really difficult to find the right bend tension. And that's just something that you kind of have to feel around. So you're going to use a band, and then, okay, now it's like way too little tension at the bottom. Okay, now it's not enough. So you kind of have to be pretty precise with it. And there are some pretty good devices for that. So if any one of you guys, I know, Steve, you had him on, Joe Bennett, the hypertrophy coach. He recommends this little, what is it called? A daisy chain or something like that. So that's something that allows you to adjust how high or low the band tension starts. So then you can kind of work around it. But I'll just find it to be too much of a pain in the ass to keep on using it. But there was a period, if you look at my Instagram, I was doing leg presses, Smith machine squats, Smith machine bench presses, everything with bands.
Yeah, I mean, a couple points on it. I mean, one, I've never seen any evidence. I'm not saying that it's not out there, but I've never seen any evidence to show that it's going to be superior for hypertrophy at all. Even from a strength standpoint, I don't know why this stuck in my head, but I remember years back, Lane Norton was being coached. I think the guy's name is Ben Escrow, and he was being coached by him. And he was saying, Ben was saying how there's no reason that you should be training with this accommodating resistance, the bands, and that basically it's always better. And even like with partials at the time, he seemed to just feel like it was always better to train with full range of motion and just like the regular strength curves. And I guess he was just going for very high specificity. Obviously, some people disagree with that. Westside has produced some of the strongest people in the world, and they pretty much, espouse the opposite of that. So I'm not saying it's definitely right. I just remember him saying that. I think, like you said, it's very hard to, it's more to bring. I also think it's hard to keep track of because bands can lose tension over time. So, I have 2 Elite FTS like black bands, and I don't like one of them I was using for like traction, where like you like kind of like pull the muscle away a little bit just as a kind of like a rehab. And I always use the same one. And if I hold them up, one of them is like an inch or 2 more stretched out than the other one. So, you could almost think that you're getting weaker over like a longer period of time, especially like at our level where like you're looking at 10 pounds maybe in a year on like a certain lift. Well, now the band tension is worse. Maybe you actually progress and it looks like you didn't, or you got a new band and all of a sudden you're like, hey, my strength is great. And in reality, there's just more tension. How far away, depending on the lift you're doing, if it's something where like, if somebody's trying to hold the band down, well, if you hold it like an inch closer or further away, that can make a big difference in how much tension is there versus like if you have a 40-pound dumbbell, you've got a 40-pound dumbbell. I mean, for the most part, if they're calibrated and whatnot. So I think that creates a lot of issues. I think for variety, it can be kind of fun, different way to, mix it up. Maybe from like an ego standpoint, you're into certain lifts and hey, it looks like you're doing a lot more weight, so that's cool. But really just for variety. I will say one anecdote I have that isn't a great anecdote, but back in 2017, I bought a neck harness to try. And, my neck, it's funny, even neck, which seems like attachments wouldn't matter that much. We talk about like long versus like short attachments versus like biceps, for instance, and how that makes a big difference. But I found that even with neck, like I always thought like, man, I had this skinny neck, but it measured like at the Adam's apple, like 15 and a half or something like that. And then I would like look at my brother and I'd say, you have like a thicker neck. And it would be like the exact same measurement. So I don't know if it's just like the length of the neck, whatever, but point is it still matters. So I bought this thing just to try it. And I just did it with bands for the first month. And I was progressing. Every time I did it, I progressed. And it felt good. Like when I was doing it, I was like, this actually really feels like it's hitting the muscle. And after 1 month, no growth at all. And so I was like, well, I'll give it 1 more month, but like it just seems like it's not going to happen. The second month, I then went to weights and I'm like ready to stop because I'm like, okay, it's been 2 months. I'm just going to stop. Took the measurements and it was up like a 1/4 inch. And I was like, damn, like I did not expect that. Since that time, I've gained like just over an inch on the neck. So now I've gone from looking at myself and thinking, wow, you have a skinny neck to like, you kind of have a normal neck at least. So it's not as bad. But the point is, it didn't grow when I was using the bands and it did with the weights. Now it was the first month that I was using the bands. Was I just, developing that neural efficiency where, I didn't actually need to build muscle. I could get stronger just kind of developing the motor patterns. Totally possible. I have no idea. But that's the only like direct comparison where I just did bands and then I just did weights. And so I never went back to bands after that because I didn't see a point.
Perfect. Yeah. Combine them.
There you go. Right.
I actually have a neck harness at home, and now I have the cable stack set up. So I was thinking of using the neck harness on that, but
yeah,
I don't know. I'm too scared of the whole sleep apnea thing, which I know is a bit overblown, but I'm a bit freaking out of that. So
yeah, I definitely think it's overblown. I think, but I mean, that's because I came from like a smaller neck. I mean, if you have an 18-inch neck, then I don't think you should probably do it. I actually also found that I haven't had, like, just from my profession, I'm like frequently kind of like bent over and like looking down, and I have significantly less neck pain since doing it. So even if I like, it was like, you could never grow anymore, or it's even going to go back, I would still do it a little bit just for, it just seems to correlate with like a reduced neck pain there.
I've never tried neck training, only traps.
Yeah. I got to ask you, Steve, it's like the third time I thought about it and I just never asked you. You have great biceps, but I got to ask about this bicep curl form of yours, because I've never seen anybody do this, like where you go up, and I'm guessing your rationale is that, the biceps are involved to some degree in shoulder flexion. It just, even when I don't use weight, that feels super awkward to me to like finish curling and then go up. But I guess it feels good to you. I've wanted to ask you about that for a while.
Yeah, so I never used to do it, and it was only until I saw Mike doing it, and I was like,
I could see that being a Mike recommendation.
why are you doing this, Mike? He was like, well, the biceps assist with shoulder flexion. So then I started trying it. I just found I got it just kind of finished off the movement for me. I just got a better full contraction there. So I don't recommend it for everyone, but for most movements, when I do it, I just get a little bit more, and I don't feel it in my anterior delt. Whereas, like, I guess people would say that's where you're going to feel it potentially. And unfortunately, I do see people do it and they're like lifting their shoulders all the way really high. And I'm like, that just looks like you're doing a front raise now. It's kind of like an all-in-one for me where I just lift just a bit. So I don't know. I just get a better connection.
So you really feel like it makes a difference for you?
It feels better than keeping the elbow down. Yeah.
I'll have to try it with weight. Maybe it'll feel different with weight, because I don't know, like I can show this on the camera here, but like when I curl up, there's definitely like you kind of go like this, and like you feel like you're done, and then there's like that little bit of that, and and that I do feel a difference. And not the weight I can use is similar, but there's like I said, there's this, and then there's that little, and maybe I'm wrong, when I'm watching you, it almost looks like you're like this, and I'll try it with weights because I haven't yet. It just when I look at it, I'm just like, it just seems awkward, but obviously, I mean, it seems to be working for you. So,
yeah, I mean, I think the Kasim Henson-esque like technical breakdown is kind of a recommendation against that, because yes, the biceps are assisting in shoulder flexion, but then elbow flexion is like the bicep. So when you're doing the two together, I think I always forget which one is active and passive insufficiency. But when the muscle becomes too shortened, it cannot activate anymore, basically. So that's kind of the reason why you want to lay back on a leg extension. Like if you were to do a leg extension and like, okay, this is going to be very awkward. Like do a leg extension and like pull your knees up at the same time, it would be very awkward. Like that's what happens when you're making a fist. If you're trying to make a fist like this with your elbow, with your wrist flexed like this, you can't, like it goes back up. So it's kind of like the muscle becomes too lengthened or too shortened. And I think the biceps become too shortened if you do shoulder flexion and elbow flexion at the same time. But with that said, what I did notice is, so I did the same, like behind the cable stake behind you type bicep curls. The Bayesian curl, I think Menno was the first one who really like popularized it. And my shoulders were always hurting when I was doing them. Like, I don't know, I felt my front delts just couldn't resist the weight properly. And when I let my elbow move forward just a little bit while I was doing them, it all of a sudden started feeling a lot better, both for my biceps and on the shoulder front.
That is probably interesting, because that's kind of like, if you look at like an incline curl where you're kind of like leaned back on an incline bench, it's obvious, it's like the exact opposite, right, of like what Steve would be doing. It sounds like kind of like what you were doing with the cable, having it like behind you. And the same thing like a drag curl, like the idea behind that is, in theory, you're isolating the biceps more, but I never felt like drag curls, I don't know, it just didn't, like, in the same way you were saying, Steve, it's like that little bit of thing. With drag curls, it was like, I just didn't feel like I was completing the movement, where you're just trying to keep the bar against your body like that. So if I had to pick the one, I would go with the additional shoulder flexion, just based on feel. Obviously, I wouldn't say you have to stick with one variation all the time anyway.
Yeah, I don't know the biomechanics well enough. I find the area of biomechanics is something I want to get better at. It's just finding a good resource.
Yeah.
I feel bad saying finding a good resource because obviously N1, Coach Kassem, I do think he's got some great stuff to say. It's just sometimes I don't agree with everything, or I see other people not agreeing with everything, which makes me feel a bit like, oh, why aren't they agreeing? I'm like, I want to have like the ultimate resource that's just like, but with
I don't know if he's got any. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, just with the incline curls and the behind, like the Bayesian style curls, I don't raise up on those because that doesn't feel better for me. It feels better to keep it just the usual kind of.
And that's is that with a cable?
Yeah, with the cables behind or on like an incline, I don't tend to raise because when I do,
it seems like it'd be awkward with the cable. Yeah. I don't know if he has any material out on it, but I know Greg Knuckles feels very confident in his knowledge on biomechanics. So maybe even just like a podcast, he's probably somebody who's good to learn from in that area, because I know he said that he feels very competent in that area. So do you guys have other movements that, and it could be for any muscle group, that is kind of like outside of the norm? I know both of you, you post up some videos of you guys doing different things. I've always kind of felt like, for the most part, if you get very strong on like the main movements, like that's going to be where the majority of your muscle comes from. But I definitely recognize that there are some people where they have a hard time. It seems like back is a big one, that people have a really hard time kind of like activating the muscles properly. I know John Meadows has a whole like series on that with his Meadows rows. I guess like back was kind of one that always responded better for me. Like if I have like any genetic gifts there, it would be my back relative to everything else, I guess. So it wasn't an area that I really had to focus on. And if anything, we could get into a whole thing on like, can you bring up weak muscle groups? Because I've given my back less attention probably than everything else, and it's proportionally remained better than others. But do you guys have like any particular movements that you lean towards where it's like, this is a little goofy or different, but you really feel like it makes a difference?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just, so I don't have anything like this, like the bicep curl, where like this just looks completely different compared to how most people do it. So I don't have some like really special lateral raise variation where the elbows and the arms are like rotating in really funky fashions. It's just like slight things that I notice, that certain things just hurt my joints every time I do them that way. So on the leg press, for example, now I know exactly like what is that level of like, where should I place my foot on the pad, and how far should I be leaning back until it like starts hurting my hips. So and oftentimes I don't post my videos on Instagram, for example, for that reason, because I can see that it's not like textbook form. Like this is not how it should look like ideally. Or like, for example, I have this chest press machine, and the thing is, when I'm locking out, like if you're just looking at it, it looks like I'm not locking out completely. And I ended up getting a shit ton of comments like, I'm sorry, but that's not even close to lockout. But it's like, you can just feel like you could do that extra like 1 millimeter of movement, but it just wouldn't really make any additional difference. And you're kind of getting all the stimulus that you need from like, as far as you locked it out. So I have a lot of little things like that, or whatever on the leg curl, like how much I'm extending my knee. So a lot of small things like that. But yeah, and then that's the thing, like form, often like good form, and this is again something I heard from Menno, but I think it's something to remember. Like good form doesn't necessarily mean like perfect looking form or pretty form. Like it's basically the technique that you need to use to get the job done pain free and to work what you want to get worked.
Yeah. So. How about you, Steve?
I am really boring, I think, because I don't think there is anything apart from maybe the bicep curl. There's nothing else I don't think I do that I'm blessed with, or not blessed, I don't know, it depends, with like big wrists, like big ankles, big knees. So I've never really had any particular niggles, and I can seem to get away with much like crushing them in whatever way I need. So I don't think, I think most of my form ends up being relatively textbook, but I mean, the one I struggle most with back opposite to you in terms of like, and like, it's just not, things feel okay, but it's always just a tricky one.
Right. Yeah, if we ever have a pose down, Steve, we are only doing back shots. That's my strong point and your weak point, and that's the only place I'm going to be able to hold a candle there. So
my front double bicep is probably actually worth. If I get the angle that takes a photo of me right, the front double bicep looks all right. But if I get the wrong angle, I'm like, what the fuck? My lats like are under my armpits, and I've got nothing there.
When I'll look at myself post-workout in the mirror, and I'm like, this is okay. Like, this isn't that bad. And then I'll like try to take a picture like you have like on your Steve, and I'm just like, this doesn't look good at all. And then it makes me think, okay, if this looks this bad, but in the mirror I think I look pretty good, then Steve looking good in his pictures must look like a god in person. I've been curious, like, how would you would look? Because I was talking to Jess, I think she or you were saying like for the longest time you didn't know her last name, and now that I'm on the spot, I'm like blanking.
With Delanglish, I'm feel awful. I'm a little bit not sure which one I'm picking.
But she was telling me that in person that you're pretty damn big. So.
Oh, what a compliment! That's nice.
Yep.
I always think I'd be really worried I was not impressive.
What were you saying, Abel?
I would be really curious to stand like next to you guys or stand next to Eric Helms. I would be just so curious to see how this all looks like in person, because Steve, you look great on your pictures, and I remember you posing with Mike Israetel, and I mean, just in terms of stats, he should be like a different human being. He's like whatever 5'6.5". He's not 5'6", so important to point out. 169 centimeters, so he's downplaying his height, and 110 kilos at the time or whatever. You're 5'10", and whatever you were at the time, 190. So it should look drastically different. And I'm not saying that he didn't look more muscular, but it wasn't like, wow, like different species, So I would be really curious to see, like, okay, Eric Helms, for example, okay, I know that he has probably a good 6-7 kilos of muscle on me. How does that actually look like in person? So
I think sometimes it can be almost underwhelming though in person, depending on, like I said, like with clothes on. I think before you jumped on, Abel, Steve and I were talking about that. Like we were talking about Jared Feather looking insane in some of his recent pictures, and he just has a super tiny waist. I mean, he just looks ridiculous. And Paul Canoe was somebody else we were talking about. And I mean, he's clearly got amazing structure. I think there's a good chance he's going to go pro when he competes. But like seeing him in person, with like shorts and a t-shirt on, like you can tell, I mean, this guy's got muscle on him. And I mean, like, I don't want to downplay it. Like, he clearly has plenty of muscle, but it's not like if you're wearing a loose shirt, it's not like if I met him not at the gym, I'd be like, wow, this is a huge bodybuilder. You know what I mean? Like, and I think with all of us and Eric Helms, like, we're all within 1 to 2 inches of height and, 10 to 15 pounds of body weight. Like, the average person would probably see us and say like, oh, those are just similar looking, white hair, like white dudes with dark hair. You know what I mean? Like, we're all just kind of like similar. So I don't know if it would be like a drastic difference, but yeah, when you get like on stage or when you're doing like a pose down and you have your shirt off and everything, then I think those small differences or even like medium differences really pop out.
Yeah. Mike in person, just fucking, he's huge. Like, just like you hug him and you're just like, what the fuck is this barrel?
And when I met him, he was wearing a gi, so I didn't really get to see. I just saw like a, kind of like a square coming towards me, or like a blocky dude. But
I think for us guys, we would all be comparable. Like, no one would look like, oh, you don't lift. You obviously lift. We
right, yeah.
You all look relatively muscular.
Yeah. Well, maybe if we had, I don't know when another like meetup is going to happen. I never went to any of them. I think you guys have both been to a few. Obviously, I don't think there's been any since COVID, but I haven't even heard of any being talked about. But it's not something I'm like really keeping in touch with all the time.
We're hoping that Eric and Mike and et al. Is going to happen next year, because that's what got cancelled this year. So that it ended up being a podcast. It was actually quite funny how that ended up happening. It was like they were meant to come over and debate this topic, and they ended up came to fruition in a different way.
Oh, right. Okay, gotcha. All right. Well, I looks like it's just after 3 now on my end. I do have a coaching call I got to jump on. Abel, I appreciate you being able to jump in here. I appreciate Steve being able to coordinate our times before we head out. Where can everybody find your stuff?
Go on, Abel.
SSD Abel on YouTube and on Instagram.
And I'm revivestronger.com and revivestronger on Instagram.